your voice should reflect your values, right? It should be authentic. And whether we want to admit it or not, people have higher expectations of those in ministry and of ministries than they do of secular or marketplace organizations. And so it's even more important for us to be intentional and to not respond emotionally or reactively or get caught up in the moment with something that's happening online, but to step back and to observe the pause and to think, okay, does this align with who we say we are? Does this align with who we want to be known for? And that intentionality is more than half of the battle.
Welcome to the Shepherds Podcast, a podcast by pastors for pastors, designed to be a communal space where relationships and resources bring refreshing and renewal to those who shepherd and lead congregations. Connect with us and check out more episodes and resources at theshepherdsnetwork.com.
Welcome to the Shepherds Network podcast. I'm John Carter, your host, and today we're going to jump into a conversation about the intersection of media and ministry. And I have a guest with me today that we have worked with over the years that is a specialist in helping churches craft their message and get it to people. Traditionally, you'd call it marketing, but it's really the process of taking who we are and what we believe and communicating it to the various groups of people that exist in our culture around us today. And my guest is Dawn Baldwin. She's the lead strategist and founder of Mavericks. And today at Shepherds, we live in a world that is fueled by technology and social media. And learning how to navigate those demands and complications that exist right now in the world that is so important. And I can't think of anybody better to talk to about this than Dawn Baldwin. So I want to welcome you, Dawn. It is so good to have you with us on the Shepherds Network podcast. How are you?
I am doing well, Pastor. How are you?
I'm doing excellent. We're experiencing a lot of good things right now in the church, and I think not only in our church, but we see this in the churches that are in our network and my pastor friends. We're all seeing a moment of growth, of harvest. Lots of new people coming into the church, hungry for the gospel. And it's really interesting because we're in such a secularized moment in our culture. We see our culture moving farther and farther away from Christianity, from biblical truth, and yet people are hungrier than ever. It's just so fascinating how when it gets dark, the light gets brighter.
Absolutely. We're seeing that as well. It seems like when you think about it, the world today almost feels like a dumpster fire. And so people are
That's
looking
right.
around and they're asking questions. They're like, I need to know what's going on. I want to know what I believe. I want to know where there's truth. And so I think that the fields really are ripe for harvest. And I'm so excited about the potential and the possibilities for ministry right now because our world desperately, desperately needs it.
Oh, absolutely. Now, Dawn, let's take a minute and tell me about Mavericks, about your organization and what you do.
Well, thanks. And thanks again for having me, Pastor John. I do appreciate it. I started this company about 30 years ago with the intention of trying to help churches of all different shapes and sizes to reach people more effectively. That's really what we do. That's what it's all about. That's what my heartbeat is all about. And we have a reputation for high touch, customized solutions, primarily brand strategy solutions for churches. Things like reaching new audiences, deepening connections with congregations, launching new campuses, building new websites, things like that. And we still offer those kinds of full service solutions for the partners that we work with. But what we realized is that a lot of churches really are struggling with the same kinds of challenges. And so what we wanted to do is we thought, what if we package some of these tools and strategies almost as kind of like a DIY sort of a thing, so it's more accessible. And so that's what we did. So it's like if you have a tighter budget or for people who, just are looking for a point in the right direction instead of being chauffeured to their destination.
Sure.
We're providing those kinds of tools. And so that's where Mavericks came in, is that we're offering these quick service solutions like downloadable strategy blueprints or community coaching leagues, one-day workshops, stuff like that. And you guys know that like when we think about name changes, we change the name because it's a chance to share a new vision, to tell a new
Right.
story about what's going on. And so we wanted to provide new tools to the arsenal for these pastors for a new era of ministry. And so we've got the full service solutions that we've always done, but then we also have these quick service types of things to help them to navigate a lot of the challenges that they're facing in ministry today.
So now, when we worked together, I think 12 years ago, we went through a rebranding.
Mm-hmm.
We developed a new logo. You're the company that we worked with to develop that. We've since rebranded again because times have changed. But that was it was a great experience because you asked us a lot of questions. You really got into the DNA of our church, and then provided some suggestions, solutions, some artwork, and really guided us through that process and even the communication of it to our congregation. Why is that important? You know, when you hear these terms, especially pastors that are maybe trained traditionally, um, you hear marketing, branding. It seems so secularized. It seems so corporate and non-spiritual, almost like we're going to try to, you know, like salesmen, you know,
Mm-hmm.
we are selling the gospel in the sense that we are endeavoring to inspire people to believe something and to participate in something, right? We're offering a service and we want to get that message out there. What's the balance between, you know, just the secular marketing approach and spiritual growth through word of mouth and through God's presence and God's anointing? How do you balance those things? Because I think we've both seen the extremes on both sides.
You're absolutely right. And it's unfortunate that marketing has gotten such a bad rap. And it's true that so many secular organizations have kind of mismanaged it. They pretend to be something that they're not. They're trying to swindle people or to trick them into doing something that they don't want to do. It feels very slick. It feels very manipulative. And so when we originally started doing this so long ago, teaching churches that marketing inherently isn't a bad thing. It's how people were applying the principles that was a bad thing. Marketing really is the art of meeting people's needs. And so when we think about, people need Jesus more than anything
Right.
else, how do we leverage the things that work in a way that honors our calling and it honors what we can do in ministry? And so every
Yeah,
time we
it's
put a
good.
sign, in front of our building, that's marketing. It's helping to meet people where they're at and take their next steps to connect with a God who loves them more than anything else. So it's really understanding the principles and then leveraging them in a way that's appropriate for ministry, which is not manipulative, it's not slick, it's not pretending to be something that you're not.
And that is so well said. I mean, the truth is that the world, and these are the people we want to reach, are getting messages from media about the church all the time, and 90% of them are negative. I was
Mm-hmm.
just reading a statistic recently about the trust in pastors. In the 80s, where I started in ministry, 1980s, the level of trust in a pastor or minister, like 80% of the population trusted pastors. Now it's something like 30%. The trust level, the feeling of that being a reliable profession and those individuals being reliable. And when you see in media today the portrayals of the church, it's almost always negative. It always involves sex or some kind of a money scheme or manipulation or seeking of power. We even have TV shows that are focused on painting the church in the worst possible light. So it's no wonder that the world has a real kind of fear of the church. And yet we want to make it easy for people to discover Jesus. And so really what you're calling marketing or branding is really just communicating the gospel and removing the barriers that already exist in culture, so that rather than having the world tell the world what we are, we can tell the world what we are. Is that right?
That's absolutely true. And we actually have two things that are working against us, though. It's not just media that's depicting Christianity in a bad light. We're doing it ourselves. And unfortunately, and this
Uh-huh.
is where a
Let's
lot of
talk about
times,
that.
yes, I think that it's unfortunate, but that Christianity as a whole has a PR problem. When people think of Christians, they think of judgmental, they think of bigots, they think of, like holier than thou sorts of attitudes. And it's unfortunate because we're leaning into that. If you just look on social media, every time, you've got pastors that are tearing apart other pastors because of the way they are or are not doing something, we're reinforcing a lot of those beliefs. And so there's no wonder that people would step back and say, I'm not sure I want any part of that, because it doesn't, they eat their own. It doesn't look fun.
It's so true. In fact, my son works for a great church in Tulsa, Oklahoma, a large multi-site, a large online campus church. And there are literally YouTube channels that were created so that when this pastor preaches, they can tear down and they literally are just designed. They're making their life off of tearing down this pastor. And this pastor is a good man. He's got a good heart. He made some mistakes, makes mistakes, but I mean, it's like Christians are dedicated to attacking other Christians, and no place do I see this worse than on YouTube. So I affirm what you're saying. And so how do we, as pastors of local churches, find the right voice in communicating? Because we've got different audiences. You've got your own internal audience, then you've got your community. And since most pastors today are online, you've got a larger audience, even beyond where you live. So how do you cultivate your voice to be accurate and appealing to those different groups?
hmm That's a really good question. It starts with kind of stepping back and being intentional. Your voice should reflect your values, right? It should be authentic. And whether we want to admit it or not, people have higher expectations of those in ministry and of ministries than they do of secular or marketplace organizations. And so it's even more important for us to be intentional and to not respond emotionally or reactively or get caught up in the moment with something that's happening online, but to step back and to observe the pause and to think, okay, does this align with who we say we are? Does this align with who we want to be known for? And that intentionality is more than half of the battle. I think, as humans, as people, we're all fallible. And so it's easy to get caught up, in the moment. And, keyboard warriors are alive and strong. And so once you hit enter, you can't take that back. So taking a moment to really think about, what is it that we're saying and how does this reflect? Because the world is watching. We're representing the God that we serve, whether we're actively aware of it or not. And so we need to act like it.
So let's lean into that. Social media,
Mm-hmm.
which I've been pastoring this church 34 years. Social media is a phenomenon that really has exploded in the last 12, 15 years,
Mm-hmm.
which is relatively recent. I mean, we now live with it. It's ubiquitous. It's everywhere, but it's really a relatively recent innovation and experiment. And I think we've all seen where social media in the church can become very complicated, especially when you have people posting things that are their expressions, their opinions, and within your own local congregation, those opinions are different. We've seen examples of church, not only our church and other churches, where you've got those keyboard warriors within the congregation kind of fighting each other over issues of whatever issue may be in the culture at the time. So let's talk about social media. I feel like everybody was quick to jump on it. And I feel like since COVID, some of us have stepped back from it. I have. Frankly, I went on a sabbatical 2 years ago, and part of my sabbatical process was to get off social media. And I really have not gotten back on since I got off, simply because I felt like I got my mind back. It was like this wonderful, I felt like I knew who I was again, because I was constantly responding to inbox messages and DMs and all kinds of things. And I was trying to pastor people, and it became very, very complicated. And yet I understand this is where the world is today. They're on social media. So this is something I really want to hear you talk about. What are some what are some rules for social media today for churches? Do we all have to be on social media? If so, how do you do it in a way that's going to be healthy for the church and for you as a shepherd and a leader?
Mm. Well, there's a few layers to that question. A good question, though, and I don't blame you for taking a sabbatical. So many are, because it just feels like the world can get so loud. And people will say things online that they would never say to your face, because it's easy to hide behind a screen or a keyboard. And so we tend to see the worst of humanity, both in ministry, unfortunately,
Yeah,
and in the secular world. It's like, oh my gosh, I know these people. Why? What are you saying? Do you not know that everyone can see that? And so it can get taxing, on your mental health. And suicide rates for teenagers is through the roof. Like, when you think of online bullying that's been happening, I mean, when we were growing up, bullying stopped, when you left school. Now it's
right.
on their phone. They've got it 24/7, and things travel so quickly. So when we think about, well, how do we manage it? First, we need to recognize it's not going away. The grand experiment is sticking. And so there's a lot of great things about social media. It's a great way to reach people. It's a great way to connect with people, but it's not going anywhere. So pretending that it doesn't exist is probably futile. But if we think about kind of how do we leverage it, when we think about it, especially from a ministry standpoint, you can look at it as a combination of a front door as well as like a backyard barbecue or a cookout. It serves kind of two roles. When you think about social media as a front door into your ministry, it gives people a taste of what to expect with your church. It represents your brand. It's a way for them to interact and experience you in new ways, even if they're outside of driving distance, of your congregation. Some of the largest churches in the country are completely online, and so thinking about the reach that we have and the ability to do ministry is fantastic. The backyard cookout side of things too is, it's kind of like, this is where people can have more of a behind the scenes look into the life of your ministry too. They can get connected, they can find community, they can feel involved, and really feel connected to the cause too. So understanding the roles that they play is super important. But when we think about from a pastor standpoint, as an individual, how do I manage all of this without losing my mind? It helps to remember, we're not alone. Even for pastors that are a team of one, you don't have a whole production team or a communications department or anything like that. You still have your congregation that can act as allies. You can recruit volunteers to help manage it. You don't have to do it all by yourself. You actually shouldn't do it all by yourself, because unfortunately, social media is an always on, 24/7, never stopping type of machine. And that's not good for anyone's soul. So getting help is important with building a team around you. Using some of the tools to schedule content in advance and to manage that and to automate some of those systems is helpful as well. But to think that one person is responsible for managing everything on their own is just, it's unrealistic and unhealthy.
Okay, so let's talk. Let's get to the details of something. So,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm not just speaking for myself. I'm speaking for other pastors that I know that have these questions. And again, this is a podcast by shepherds for shepherds of the local church. We're not really focused on the laity. We're not here to try to explain every. We're here. This is for professionals who are in this line of work. And as I'm interacting with shepherds, uh, there's confusion about what social media platforms should I be on. There's the big ones: Facebook and Instagram and Snapchat and TikTok. But there's LinkedIn. There's all of these various things. What are best practices for? First of all, and two questions in this: what are the social media outlets that are best serving for the church and the pastor in his role as a pastor of the church, and then personally for the shepherd? Because you've got your own personal life, and then you've got your ministry professional life. And if you mix those up in social media, it can be very, very confusing.
Mm-hmm.
Can you speak to that?
Yes, and I think it might be a layered answer to that question too. When we think
Okay.
about platforms, you're right. There's so many to choose from. I would start by encouraging pastors to not try to take on everything all at once. It's better to start with one and do it well and to post consistently than it is to have more of a random scattered approach. A lot of times ministry leaders will feel like, oh my gosh, there's their TikTok's blowing up, we should be there. And Facebook, it seems like that's where everybody is. And Instagram, that's where everybody is. So I'm going to try to rush out and do all of these things at the same time. I'm not really doing any of them well. Don't do that. Start with thinking about where is your audience. Different ministries will do a better job reaching different audiences through different platforms and different channels. So there really isn't a one size fits all. It starts with who you are as a pastor, the type of church that you have, and who you're trying to reach. Where are they at? That's the
So
first
let
place to think of.
okay.
Yeah,
So
go ahead.
let's take Facebook.
Mm-hmm.
What is Facebook? Who are the if you want to reach a certain demographic, what is Facebook best to be used for?
Facebook is really best to reach older people. The
Okay.
younger people, people in their 20s, people in their 30s, they're not really on Facebook anymore. They're on TikTok and Instagram. That's where they are. So if you are trying to reach younger people, it doesn't mean that Facebook is bad. It just know that that's not where a lot of them are hanging out.
Okay. So Facebook is say the over 40 set,
Yeah,
basically.
definitely. Mm-hmm.
Okay. So let's take a look at Instagram, which
Mm-hmm.
is part of Facebook now. But
Mm-hmm.
what is Instagram? Who are they hitting?
Instagram is really more of the 20s and 30s. A lot of they still use it for inspirational posts and for videos. Reels are fantastic. Those are short little videos. And so when you think of what it is that we're trying to do, let's say that you have your weekend message. If you take a little snippet of that, 30 seconds or so, and you post that as a reel, that's a great way to give people a taste of the message. You're pulling maybe a point out of it on Instagram with the goal of connecting people and bringing them back so they can watch the full message or really learn more about learn more about the ministry. Instagram is also great. Let's say if you want to have like a graphic that's beautiful and you're pulling a quote from your message and it's over a picture and you have the scripture or the quote written on the picture, that they can share with their friends. So think of it as a great way for teaching, inspiration. You can use Instagram to do some behind the scenes for like serving in the community, volunteering. Um, a great like if you ever want to see a case study or just a clinic of who does social media on all the different channels super well is Life Church. Life Church does a fantastic job. And so if anyone goes to life.church and click on any of their social media channels, they essentially put a clinic on every single day on how to do social media well in ministry.
Wow. So Life Church out of Oklahoma City,
That's right.
Pastor Craig Rochelle, they actually have resources that teach pastors and churches how to develop their social media voice.
They have that in their resources section, but if you
Okay.
just look at what they're doing as an example,
I see.
that you can learn a lot from just seeing what they're doing. What kinds of posts are they sharing? How are they using the different channels? That's a great way, even without step by step, just looking at them as an example is a great way to learn a lot.
Okay. Let's talk about TikTok.
Mm-hmm.
What is TikTok good for in the church? Like if you have a Facebook presence and an Instagram presence, why would it be important to develop a TikTok presence? Or if you really haven't got a social media strategy, should you start with TikTok? I mean, what is TikTok best for, and kind of explain how that works? And again, I'm asking these questions for all the pastors that are out there, young pastors who probably have all this down, and pastors that have been serving a while that maybe are still trying to figure it out.
No, it's a great question. And there's been a lot of controversy and questions around TikTok. A lot of people assumed that TikTok was just for, high school teenage girls who are doing goofy dance moves, and it was very trivial. COVID changed all of that. COVID is when everyone was locked in their houses, they had nothing else to do. And so TikTok became the fastest growing social media platform, period. What's great about TikTok is that people stay on the platform a lot longer than they do any of the other channels. And so they're just scrolling, they're watching, video after video. And the algorithm is fine tuned to pay attention to things that you're watching. And then it will present a lot more content that matches. So if you are watching, like, let's say a video of someone teaching or about Jesus, you're going to suddenly get a lot more of those kinds of videos. And so it tailors your content on the fly. So that's one of the things that is a strong uh, benefit of TikTok. People
What are
use
the
TikTok.
demographics of those who are using TikTok? Like
Oh,
if you want,
it
who are you going to
spans.
reach?
You can reach people that are teenagers up to people in their literally in their 80s. Like, it's got a huge span on TikTok because of the types of content that's available. Like, there's content, people will teach you how to buy a car. They'll teach you how to purchase real estate. They'll teach you how to change a tire. Like, I mean, it literally has a wide variety of content on TikTok. And so this is why it could be a fantastic field for missions. I've seen on TikTok people have done playful sketches like, what if what if they had the two disciples that were running to the tomb on Easter morning, and they were arguing about why did you have to include that one got there faster than the other, like, and they made it into a sketch and they made it funny. Another was pretending to be Jesus's mother in present day, and so she was speaking with a really heavy Jewish accent, and she was like, really, and so there's fun things that they do with it. But then there's also people who are taking questions live, like, what kinds of questions do you have about Revelation? And there's pastors that are just doing live questions. There's this little old lady who will do just inspirational kind of live feeds where she'll just talk about how God has a plan for you, and that you're here for a purpose. And it's amazing. Like, you've got millions of people that will watch. The reach is phenomenal. So you can share teaching, you can do live Q&As, you can make it funny, you can, there's a lot of flexibility with the platform.
So the last question I have about this is Snapchat,
Mm-hmm.
because we've got a lot of younger people on Snapchat.
Mm-hmm.
How does that intersect with the other social media platforms? And in what way is a church, can or should a church be integrating or utilizing that platform?
Snapchat is amazing to me that it's still as popular as it is. A lot of people love to use it because of the filters, and they can send quick little personalized messages to people where you can look like you're a cat, or you have like a horse's face, or whatever. So I honestly am just amazed that that is still as strong as it is, because my daughter was messing with it 15 years ago. She was using that
Right.
platform, and still is. So I think it really kind of comes down to how much can you take on at once? What is it that you're wanting to do with the platform? And is it going to give you the most return on investment for your time? I personally, I would have Snapchat a lot lower on the list, compared to Instagram or TikTok, just because of the reach and the growth of those platforms. But you're right, it's still there. There's a lot of young people that are still having fun with it. Pinterest is actually another one. If you're looking in the 20 sector, there's so many people in their 20s that are kind of re-energizing Pinterest. And
Okay.
so thinking about, like, can we post verses, studies, scriptures? There's a lot you can do with that as well.
Okay. So if a pastor wants to really start focusing on their social media, maybe know their audience, but you would recommend out of the box probably TikTok and Instagram as a starting place?
I would say if you're looking to reach younger people, yes, I would pick one of the two and start just getting consistent with it. Now, with TikTok, the hard part is you have to post a lot of content. Like, people will post not just once a day or every day, they're posting 4 and 5 times a day, which can feel like a lot, for someone who's starting out. So I would say, think about what it is that you can actually manage, start slow, don't be discouraged. You've got to, consistency is where you build trust. It's like the flywheel principle. You've got to keep going at it before it starts to pick up momentum. Once it starts to pick up momentum, it's hard to stop.
So pastors who are going to develop, say that you have some kind of a social media presence, you want to sharpen that presence, you want to focus on it. This is one of the things that I found difficult. As a shepherd, I have personal social media that I've had, and then there's the ministry social media, and sometimes those worlds cross. And sometimes people will direct message me with pastoral concerns, questions, and sometimes they're very intense. So the kinds of things that, as a shepherd, you feel responsible to answer, to respond to. I feel like I want to take my life. My husband, I just found out my husband has had a heart attack. I mean, real serious. It's just amazing how many people will just DM. I've experienced this about issues that are going on, and they require pastoral care. The challenge I have as a pastor of a larger church with a robust pastoral care team in place is that people are bypassing the system, the pastoral care system that we have, coming to me, and then I feel responsible to then bring that to the people, and sometimes they're already on it, and so one of the challenges I've had is I really don't want to have direct messages because I feel responsible. And I have some pastor friends who say, just ignore your direct messages, don't respond to them. But then that sends a message to me that, if you're a congregant or you're someone in crisis, you direct message to pastor and they never got back to you, it would feel like negligence. So how do you manage that?
Mm-hmm. A lot of it, I know that there are tools depending on the platform that you're on. So let's say with Facebook or with Meta, you can set up even your personal account as a business account, which will then allow you to have automated replies, that are based on keywords. You can have other people weigh in where you can share it, where they can actually respond to those things as well. And so there are some tools that are available based on the platform that you're on, so you're not responsible for trying to manage all of that on your own, because you're right, it can, when you have someone who's saying that they feel like they're in a dark place and that they don't know if they can go on, yes, we don't want to ignore that. I mean, it's just, that's the hard part about being in ministry, but we need to protect our souls as well. And so being able to put some systems and tools in place where you're not the only one that's responding is helpful. And a lot of that is going to depend on what platform that you're on. But that would be a
Is there a way
first
to
place to
turn
start.
off? I'm sorry. Is there a way to turn off direct messages so you just people don't have a place to send it? So
I believe so, with the business accounts like that Meta has and Instagram has. I believe that
okay,
you can. Um, and so that's kind of where it comes into, how do we separate the personal side of being on social media versus the ministry side of
yeah, let's
being on
talk about
social
that.
media. And so the leaders that we've worked with, oftentimes they will essentially kind of shut down the personal side and open up a different account that's private, and that you can control who has access to you, who doesn't have access to you, and then funnel everything through the church's corporate accounts. And then that makes it a lot easier to use that as it was intended to do ministry, which is really what it's for, through the church channels. And that's where you can direct them to a pastoral care team, because those are through the right channels. And having a personal account that maybe is limited, where it's not visibly accessible, people have to request to be your friend and you approve that, and it's not as available as it may be from when you first started out.
Uh, do you find as you work with churches that they struggle with managing social media in terms of the responses and staying on top of, comments and then you've got the trolls.
Yeah.
Sometimes you've got people that are being critical, but they have sincere questions, and a lot of times they're being critical and they really aren't. They're just trolling you. So I know that a lot of the pastors that I work with that are working with churches, they're dealing with this all the time. And so what are some best practices for churches in their social media accounts to be able to manage and separate out that so that you're not just constantly responding to everything that comes forth?
Yeah. Well, you're yes, and yes. So
Okay.
the first is you don't want to feed the trolls. There are people that sometimes they're just looking to start arguments, and so this is where
Don't
discernment.
feed the trolls. I like that.
Don't feed the trolls. Now,
Yeah,
this
come
doesn't
back.
mean that it's okay to just ignore everyone, because that's another thing that churches tend to do is they don't engage with comments, and they should, for like general comments. So when people ask questions, or they'll say, the service really spoke to me today, and you'd be surprised how many church accounts those comments are just completely ignored and unanswered. And that would be like, you're hosting a party and someone comes up to you and they ask a question, or they said, I really had a good time, and you just walk away, or ignore them. That's what happens. So social media at its core, it's important to remind everybody, it's social. This is a two-way conversation. So it does matter to try to engage. And this is where it helps to have a team, that's surrounding you to manage that through the church's channels. But when we're finding people who are trolls and they're just looking to start problems, um, taking it offline is a great way, addressing it and say, hey, I'm really sorry, I would love to talk with you, either privately, or we can meet over coffee, like actually calling them out on it, and having a spirit of, we are a witness. And so, like, let's make sure that we're still acting like it online is important, versus just ignoring or hiding or deleting posts,
Sure.
so looking into that a little bit is helpful.
What
um
are some of the when it comes to your staff members
mhm.
and to your elders, pastors, and leaders, what are some standards, protocols, or rules you should put in place with your church leaders and representatives as it relates to their private social media account? And the reason I
Mhm.
bring this up, just to give you an example, uh, we have a diverse congregation, and that diversity is not only reflected in the ethnicity of our people, but also in their social economic backgrounds and in their
Mhm.
political perspectives. And so there have been times that people who are church leaders and representatives have very strong feelings about something politically or about something culturally, and they're expressing it in their social media, but they're ministering to hundreds of people that may have that issue in our own church or that may feel differently. And so what I've seen is that sometimes people have been offended by private posts of elders, deacons, church leaders, people who are perceived to be church representatives. They're posting their opinions. They have every right to do that, but those opinions are not posted in a way that's sensitive to the complexity of the congregation. How do you develop protocols for your church leaders and social media?
The first really is to not feed the trolls, which we were talking about. It's like to remember that we're representing Christ, and so, like, both online and offline. And so to really think about how can we be intentional about connecting with people if someone is trying to start problems, because there are some folks that their mission in life is to just wreak havoc, right? And so they'll complain about something, address their concerns. That's okay. Offer to take it offline. Hey, I'm really sorry you were unhappy about XYZ. I'd love to learn more. Feel free to message me or to contact this person. That actually diffuses, so many problems.
That's great.
So that's one to think about. Another is to actually remember that social media is social, and to engage with people. Remember, it's a conversation. When folks leave comments or have questions, there's so many churches that just ignore it altogether. And so that's a little bit like being a host of a party and someone comes up to you and say, hey, I really appreciate you inviting me. And then you just turn and walk away. We don't want to do that.
What about just
So
putting a thumbs up emoji? Like, is that,
that counts. That
it
totally
does count?
counts.
Okay.
Yep. It's kind of like saying, hey, and just doing a hat tip to someone, that counts. And so just you're acknowledging that they're there, and, and recognizing that they're contributing. And sometimes it can be a copy paste, like, I'm so glad you enjoyed it. Or that's when having a team of others to respond to some of those things on your behalf can be really helpful. The third is to post consistently. So many churches will get excited and they'll either do super sprints, and then go dark. So they'll get very excited, they have all this content, and then they just disappear. And
Why is that
posting,
bad? Just practically speaking.
practically speaking, because consistency builds trust. And so when you're communicating with your audience, you want to build trust. And so it's better to, if you're a visionary type, which I know you are, Pastor John, it's better to think through that content and then have it scheduled out. So it will be like drips of content over time than it is to post it all at the same time and then be quiet forever. Because you have to remember that every time you post, not everyone is going to see it. Like, how many times do we see things that are days later or sometimes weeks later in the feed? So just, you have to post consistently to build an audience and to build your following. And so that's a good thing. So having a content calendar or having tools to schedule content or others to help with filling in the blanks is a big thing. Along with posting consistently, a lot of times churches will view it more as a billboard versus that conversation. So you don't want to just be talking about promotions or events all the time. Using the party analogy, this would be like you're standing in the middle of the room just yelling things like, of what you did or where you're going or where your house is. You want to use it more as a two-way. So think about different types of content that you can post. Maybe it's a short little video of people that are serving, or maybe they're inspirational quotes, or maybe it's unpacking scripture a little bit more. Don't just post what's happening when. You want to round that out. So
That's good.
think inspiration versus just information. You should have probably 3 times as much inspiration as you do information, if that
Oh, that's
helps.
good. That's good.
Um,
3 times as much inspiration as information.
Yes, an inspiration would count like the behind the scenes things, asking people questions, showing serving, showing kind of like what it means to get involved, sharing stories, testimonies, all of that counts as inspiration. So 3 to 1, that's
Okay.
a good kind of ratio. Using visuals often, uh, that's an important thing. Like photos, graphics, little videos, they don't have to be super fancy, but these things are rewarded by the algorithm overlords on all of the social media channels. And so they will be they'll be more visible if you have graphics, photos, and
Okay.
videos. Plus, they stick with people longer. So use that. 2 more quick things, and I lost count of my numbers
That's
because math
okay.
is
That's okay.
math is
Let's hear
hard.
it. This is great.
Don't measure success by the number of followers or likes. A lot of times, ministries will think, "Oh, I have this many followers or I have this many likes. That must mean I'm doing well," and that's not a bad thing. But it's engagement. That's what matters. Is you want to look at your engagement numbers. Engagement is how many times are your posts being reshared? How many times are people commenting? So it's like, how are they interacting? What are they doing with the content that you post? So think
Okay.
about engagement, versus just
Seeing
followers
it.
and yes, exactly. The likes
Yeah.
and follows are just the tip of the iceberg.
Okay.
Last thing with social media do's and don'ts that so many churches don't think about is to have a plan for communicating in a crisis. Like, what do
Mm,
we do? How are we responding if there's a crisis? Who is managing that? Because the media will talk to anyone who's connected with the church, and that's now the official spokesperson. So
right.
having a plan for crisis communications is critical. So, really thinking through that, making sure everyone's aware of what your policies, procedures, protocols are, especially when it comes to social media, and how those channels are going to be used to respond to people is super important.
Wow. That's awesome. And Dawn, one of the things that I struggle with personally, and we talked a little bit about, is this idea of information overload. Just
Mm.
too much material. What are you mentioned to me that some really great things about some resources you have about avoiding information overload. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Sure. Information overload. The kind of the long and short of it is there's so much that's competing for people's attention today that we need to be curators of content. And historically in ministry, we tend to over communicate because we want to make sure nothing is left out. But what happens is that overwhelms and confuses our audience. So when we have 42 announcements from the pulpit that we're trying to make, or our website is just cluttered with so much information, or there's 84 action steps, to get involved, we're contributing to this same problem, of providing too much information. We're not the only ones that are competing for people's attention, especially sometimes our own ministries are competing for the congregation's attention. And we don't want that. We want to be curators of content. And the way you do that is you think about what is it that people need to know now and what is their next step. Like that's really where we want to focus our communications. Think about it kind of like if you had a visual when you go to an airport and you've got airport signage. You start with arrivals and departures. Just keep it real basic. What is it that they need to know? What do they need to know now? What is their next step? We don't tell them all of the gates and all of the places and all of the airlines right away. You kind of
Yeah.
take that next step. So being curators for content is important, and developing a system is helpful because a lot of churches are not sure how do we decide what gets communicated when and where. And so I have a present for your listeners. It's a framework. It's one of those blueprints I was talking about. It's a
Yeah.
communications framework for you guys of determining what gets communicated when and where. And a lot of times churches, they may have tried this sort of an approach before, but a lot of these systems are based on priority, like high priority, medium priority. Well, nobody wants to be considered a low priority, right? Like you've got
Of
the
course.
anointed bead stacking ministry, they don't want to be considered a low priority. So seriously, or the women's ministry is like, no, I need to have this because, or Pastor John has to talk about the redheaded knitters named Marge because otherwise no one's going to come to our event.
Right. Right. Yeah.
Well, that's just overwhelming people with information. So this framework is based on visibility, like what opportunities and events are the most visible to the people who need to know, who's going to care the most about what these are, and then assigning channels and tools to each of those makes it a lot easier to manage. So then ministries are less angry with, okay, why does Pastor John or whoever's in charge of communications hate me that I don't get a refrigerator magnet or a logo or whatever. You have a system. You say, okay, what is your opportunity or event or your ministry? Where does it fall with our visibility? What tools and channels do you have available? So I have that for your listeners, free. You guys can have that. Hopefully that'll make it a little bit
Thank you.
easier.
Oh,
Yeah, to
that'll be
determine.
fantastic, and that'll be in our show notes. So,
Yes,
our watchers and listeners, our viewers, you can just tap on the show notes, and all those resources will be there for you.
absolutely.
Fantastic. I guess the last question I'd have for you, Dawn, is how do we make sure that what we're saying is really what we want to say, that we're communicating who we really are when we're communicating to our people?
That's a great question. And I think it really starts with remembering that we're not producing a product, but we're actually offering an experience for people.
That's
And
excellent.
this is important to remember because they're handled very differently from a communications perspective. When you
Okay.
have a product that you're chunking out, products are consistent. It's the same kind of widget, but experiences are delivered by people. And people are notoriously inconsistent. They may have bad
Right.
days or they may have their own way of doing things, but experiences are what people remember because they remember how we make them feel. And that's
Yes.
what truly matters. And so it's like, are we representing our values? Are we representing Jesus? Are we reflecting Jesus to people who may or may not know him yet? And so one way you can kind of step back and say, are we who we say we are? Are we truly walking the talk is by assessing the experience every so often. So the way you do this is you can do this either internally or you can have an outside partner help. And this
Okay.
is where you want to think about all the different ways that someone interacts with your church through the eyes of a new person. Like pretend you're brand new, because we get used to how things are, right? Like
Totally.
we don't we forget, that people may not know, but like think about it from someone who's new. And so it's like, on our social media channels, on our website, when you roll into the parking lot, when you walk through the facilities, if you attend a wedding or a funeral, like what are those experiences
Yes.
like? Do they tell the same story? Are they in
Excellent.
alignment? Where are there opportunities to improve? So like when we had teamed up with you guys, we had run focus groups, remember? And so we were talking
Yes.
to brand new people and we said, what were your perceptions? What were your first impressions of the church? Like what were the things that really stood out to you? And you'd be surprised what matters to them, what they
Yeah.
remember. And so, oftentimes we get so caught up in the day to day, it can be hard to step back and think about the experience of how everything aligns and how it all adds up together. But we're really more than the sum of all of our different moving
You know,
parts.
this is so good. When you're talking, it reminds me of this concept of becoming nose blind. Like when you
Mm,
live in your
yeah,
house,
yeah.
it smells neutral to you.
Mm-hmm.
But sometimes if you go away for 2 or 3 weeks and you come back, you're like, oh, what's that smell? And you realize, the dog actually went in the corner, right? Or
Mm-hmm.
you just, it's sometimes you become nose blind when you're exposed to it all the time. And I think you can become visually blind. You just become acclimated and you think that everybody's perceiving it the way that you are. But the fact is, you're so familiar with it that you're not perceiving everything that others are. So how does a pastor do that? I mean, I know that there's some organizations that you can hire that they come in as secret shoppers. They show up on a Sunday. They don't say when. They come in just as a guest. Actually, you can hire them as consultants. You don't know what they're
Mm-hmm.
going to look like. They come in, they go through the whole experience, and then they sit down with the pastor afterwards and say, hey, listen, nobody greeted me at the door. Or, did you realize that your announcements were totally using insider language? I had no idea what you were talking about. You don't have clear signage. I couldn't find the bathroom. And that is one way that churches have sometimes become aware of what they're nose blind to. What are some things pastors can do practically to become aware of what they're not aware of?
Mm-hmm. No, that's great. And you can do this internally. And so, as a pastor, working with your team, sometimes what helps is to just get together and do a little brainstorm session. Like you can ask folks the weekend before, say, hey, I want you to pay attention this weekend when you come to church. Really pay attention to what kind of experience, what your experience is. Try to think about it like you have a new person hat on, and then connect as a team and have a conversation. And so what I encourage folks to do, or what we'll do with teams, is that you literally grab like a whiteboard or a big one of those flip chart things, and let's start by writing down all the different ways that people interact with our brand, or with our church. So our website, our weekend service, our facilities, our, like even how we handle billings, everything. Think about how people interact with our church, and then just start chunking through them. Say, does this represent who we want to be known for? And what I encourage folks is like take a green marker, circle the ones that, yep, we're doing well. Like our ushers are a reflection of hospitality and
Right.
making people feel welcome. And then think about, where do we see some opportunities to improve, and then circle those in red and literally ask people, what are we going to do about this? Who is going to be responsible for it? When are we going to make that happen? So the first step is just stepping back and thinking about it and looking to,
Observing it, being aware. Yeah.
yes, exactly. Like I have a one quick story for you. Like a friend of mine was and this is like, to think about how we interact, or the different touch points, is pretty significant and in ways that we don't think about. And so with this story, there was a guy that I know, he was a commercial electrician, and his company was doing work for this one church, and everything went fine except for when it came time to pay the invoice. And so the church kept putting it off and putting it off. And now this guy is an unbeliever. He believes that Christians are hypocrites. He doesn't go to church, and so, but he was doing work for them. And so every time he would ask where the payment is, he would get another excuse. The assistant would say, "Oh, well, I put it on the executive pastor's desk. They're getting to it. I'm pretty sure they signed it." Another month or two would go by. "Oh, they're supposed to put the check in the mail. They just haven't gotten to it yet." And they just kept putting him off and putting him off. And finally, this guy's like, "I have no idea why they're taking so long to pay this. It's not that they don't have the money. They're in the middle of building their third campus. That's what we help them with. But they're just choosing to drag their feet with paying." And it just left a really bad taste in his mouth. That is an experience. It reinforced his perception about church people being hypocrites and that they don't do what they're going to say that they're going to do. And so it's crazy when we think about like what we do matters. What we say matters. How we treat people matters. And so we should really kind of step back and think about how do those things really all tie together.
Yeah, that's excellent, Dawn. Excellent. This has been fantastic. I'm inspired. I'm sure many of our viewers and listeners are inspired too. I think it's one of the things that we just spoke about that is so key, and I want to just underscore, is the idea of taking that step back and observing how are we communicating, not just how do we think we're communicating based on our intentions, but how are we effectively communicating? How is it being received and perceived? One of the things that happened when you did those focus groups that was so great is you brought in just congregants, members of the church,
Mm-hmm.
and got to ask them questions. And we got to see where we're strong. We also got to see some areas where we were blind. We just didn't capture that. And so I think, just to add to what you're saying, pulling together a group of people that are new to the church in the last 6 months and just sitting down with them and say, "Hey, listen, tell me, what was your best experiences coming in? What are the things that impressed you? What are some of the things that turned you off? What are some things that you think we could do better?"
Mm-hmm.
Right? Just asking some simple questions.
Absolutely. Yes. And talking with people who are new to the church is critical. More so than even people who have been with the church for a long time. And sometimes folks will ask me, well, if we're trying to reach people who don't go to the church, shouldn't we talk to people who don't go to the church? And that's a great question. My answer is no. And the reason why is because there are going to be some people who will never go to the church, and it doesn't
Right.
matter what you do or don't do. So focus on those who are brand new. The newer, the better.
Right.
It doesn't matter if they're members. It doesn't matter if they've only attended a day. Think about like people who have made the decision to come and talk to them and ask them about what their perceptions were. Like, what did they think of the church, or what did they hear about the church before coming? What really stood out to them? What do they value most? In the spirit of
Excellent.
ongoing excellence, what can we do to improve? The one caveat I would say is if you're going to do it internally, and you need to have someone facilitate those conversations that the participants don't recognize and don't know is connected with the church, because it compromises what they say. So if
I
you
see.
have like a staff member who's facilitating that they know, or if they know that person is on staff or connected to the church, they're not going to be honest with you, unfortunately, because,
Okay.
everybody wants to be nice. So, but
So
it's valuable.
this is a good place for us to land, because that's what you do,
Mm-hmm.
Don.
That's one of the things we do. Yep.
So if some of our pastors and ministry leaders who are listening to this want to go deeper and want to know more about, maybe know more from you and from Mavericks and what you do, get some consultation with you, see your resources, how do they get in touch with you? What's a way that they can begin to access what you have to offer?
They can shoot me an email. And so that's dawn
Okay.
at mavericks.cc. And, just give me a sense of what's going on in their world. We can set up a time to talk. I'm happy to do consultations, and we can either point them to resources that already exist that we have available, or if we need to go a bit deeper, I can point them in the right direction. Or if there's another team that might be a better fit, even, I'm happy to direct them in the right place. So just shoot me an email is a great place to start.
Fantastic. Don, this has been wonderful. Thank you so much. And thank you for what you do for churches, helping them to really craft the message of Christ in a way that is going to be received. And I just want to tell you how much I appreciate you and the work that you do. We're believing for God to use you in great ways. It is, as we said at the beginning, a brave new world. And it is difficult and dark and troubling out there, but what a time to shine. What a time for the power of the Holy Spirit to work through the church to draw people to Christ. We're seeing it happen, and I believe there's a great harvest yet to come. So thank you, Dawn. God bless you. And we want to say to you, thank you for being a part of the Shepherds Network podcast. Make sure that you take time to subscribe to the podcast, to like, and to share what you're hearing with others. And let us know what's hitting for you. You may have questions, comments. You may have some things that we've talked about that you disagree with. We'd love to hear from you as a ministry leader and or a shepherd about what God's saying to you through these podcasts. So we love you. God bless you. Until we talk to you next time, may God bless you in every area of your life and ministry.
Thanks for joining us on the Shepherds Podcast. For more episodes and resources, you can check out our YouTube page or our website at theshepherdsnetwork.com.